He's gone.
You need to take the boy out of this room. The words fell into the ICU, like a door closing. 6-year-old Noah Park stared at the doctor, then at the man lying motionless beneath the white hospital sheets. Adrian Park, the Korean-American Mafia boss whose name could silence an entire room, had been pronounced brain dead. The machines beside him continued their steady rhythm, but the room had already begun to feel like a place where hope no longer belonged. Noah shook his head.
No.
His voice was small, but there was nothing uncertain about it. Elena Carter, the Black Maid who had cared for Noah for nearly 2 years, reached gently for his hand. Noah, sweetheart, let's give your dad some space. He pulled his hand away. He told me he'd come back. The doctor lowered his eyes. I know this is difficult. But Noah climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed and placed his cheek against Adrian's chest. He wrapped both arms around his father and refused to move. He's listening.
Elena froze.
She had heard Noah say those words before, but never like this. Adrian had always been a distant man with the rest of the world, controlled and unreadable behind tailored suits and guarded eyes. But with Noah, there had been one strange ritual. Whenever the boy became frightened, Adrian would pull him close and let Noah rest his head against his chest. Hear that? Adrian would ask. That's your dad. As long as you can hear it, you're not alone. Now Noah pressed his ear against that same place. His small fingers tightened around the fabric of Adrian's hospital gown. Dad, promise. The room went silent. Elena looked toward the monitor. The numbers remained steady. The doctors exchanged quiet glances, already preparing for difficult decisions the family would have to make. Noah didn't understand medical words like neurological function or clinical prognosis. He understood promises. He understood his father's voice. And he understood that leaving this room felt wrong. I'm staying, he whispered. Elena sat beside him. She didn't tell him that everything would be okay. She didn't make a promise she couldn't keep. She simply stayed. Outside the glass doors, Adrian's. Lawyers were already speaking in hushed voices. Family members were calling from across the country. People who had spent years fearing Adrian Park were suddenly wondering what would happen to his empire now that he could no longer lead it. But inside the room, none of that mattered to Noah. He only cared about the man beneath his cheek. Then, barely loud enough to hear, the monitor changed. A single unfamiliar rhythm appeared between the steady tones. Elena lifted her eyes. One of the nurses stopped walking. The doctor turned back, toward the screen. Noah didn't move. He only whispered, see? He's still here. And for the first time since Adrian Park had been declared brain dead, nobody in that room was ready to say goodbye. 3 years earlier, before the hospital lights and whispered conversations, Adrian Park had been a very different kind of man. To most people in Chicago, his name carried weight. He owned restaurants, offices, and private businesses scattered across the city, and people who worked around him knew better than to mistake his quiet nature for weakness. Adrian rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. A single look from across a room could end an argument before it began. But there was one person who could make that controlled expression disappear completely. His 6-year-old son, Noah. Every morning, Noah would appear at the kitchen doorway in mismatched socks, his dark hair still messy from sleep, holding the same blue dinosaur he had carried since he was 4. Adrian would glance up from his coffee and pretend to be annoyed. You're supposed to be asleep. Noah would grin. I am hungry. That sounds serious. It is. And somehow, the most powerful man in the room would put down his phone and make breakfast. Elena Carter had watched that transformation countless times. She was a Black Maid at the Park residence, but Noah had never thought of her as simply an employee. To him, Elena was the person who knew where every missing toy had gone, who remembered which stories he liked before bedtime, and who could tell from the sound of his footsteps whether he was happy or worried. She had also noticed something most people never saw in Adrian. Behind the expensive suits and carefully measured words was a father who was terrified of failing his son. After Noah's mother died, Adrian had tried to become everything at once. Provider, protector, father. He filled the house with staff because he believed that keeping Noah safe meant surrounding him with people. But safety was not the same as presence. Some evenings, Noah would sit at the long dining table with Elena while Adrian worked late in his office. The boy would stare toward the hallway and ask the same question. Is Dad coming? Elena never lied. He said he would. And when Adrian finally appeared, even hours later, Noah would brighten as if the waiting had never happened. One evening, Adrian found Noah asleep on the couch with his head resting against Elena's shoulder. He stopped in the doorway. Elena carefully lowered her voice. He waited for you. Adrian looked at his son for several seconds. I know. Then he walked over, lifted Noah gently, and carried him upstairs himself. Before leaving the room, he paused beside Elena. Thank you. It was only 2 words, but from Adrian Park, they meant more than a speech.
Elena smiled softly.
He just needed his father. Adrian looked toward Noah's sleeping face. I am trying. She believed him. That was why the events that followed frightened her so deeply. Because Adrian had spent years believing money could protect the people he loved. He did not know that someone had already begun working against him. And he certainly did not know that the person who would notice the first warning sign would not be one of his lawyers, guards, or advisors. It would be Noah, the little boy who still believed his father always kept his promises. The warning arrived on a Thursday evening, hidden inside an ordinary day. Adrian had returned home earlier than expected, and for once, Noah was waiting for him at the front entrance instead of the kitchen. Elena noticed the boy was unusually quiet. He held his blue dinosaur tightly against his chest and kept looking toward the driveway. What happened? She asked gently. Noah shook his head. Something is wrong with Dad. Elena glanced toward Adrian, who was speaking, with one of his advisors near the study. Your father is right there. Noah looked at her. Not now. Before. The words made Elena pause. Adrian had spent the afternoon downtown at a private business meeting. According to his assistant, the meeting had ended normally. There had been no argument, no emergency, nothing that should have frightened a child. But Noah insisted that something had changed. Earlier that morning, Adrian had promised to pick him up from school himself. Instead, an unfamiliar driver arrived. Noah had noticed that the man did not know the small routine Adrian always followed. He did not ask about Noah's day. He did not remind him to buckle his seatbelt twice. He simply said that Mr. Park had been delayed. To an adult, it might have seemed insignificant. To Noah, it was wrong. Adrian always called when plans changed. Always. That evening, Elena watched Adrian enter the dining room. He looked tired, but otherwise normal. Noah immediately ran toward him. Adrian opened his arms, and the boy disappeared against his chest. You came back, Noah whispered. Adrian smiled. I told you I would. Elena watched the moment quietly. Then, she noticed something on the table. A small envelope had been placed beside Adrian's phone.
There was no name on it.
Adrian opened it, read the contents, and his expression changed for only a second. It was so brief that almost anyone would have missed it. Elena did not. She had learned to recognize the smallest shifts in his face. Everything all right? She asked. Adrian folded the paper and placed it inside his jacket. Just business. But later that night, Elena heard him speaking quietly in his office. She could not make out every word, but one sentence reached the hallway clearly. Move the meeting. Then silence. The next morning, Adrian broke another routine. He did not have breakfast with Noah. He left before the boy woke up. Elena found Noah standing at the window, watching the driveway. He did not say goodbye, Noah whispered. Elena knelt beside him. He may have been in a hurry. Noah looked at her with unusual seriousness. Dad always says goodbye. She had no answer. By noon, Adrian had missed 2 calls. From Elena and 1 from Noah's school. By 3 o'clock, his phone went unanswered. Then, just before sunset, the front doors opened and 2 members of Adrian's staff entered the house with expressions Elena had never seen before. No one spoke at first. Noah ran toward them. Where is my dad? One of the men looked away. Elena felt the room become strangely quiet. Then the phone on the table rang. A hospital number appeared on the screen.
Elena answered.
She listened for only a few seconds before her face went pale. What happened? Noah asked. Elena looked at him, and for the first time, she understood that the ordinary life they had known was already gone. Adrian Park had been taken to the hospital, and nobody was ready to tell Noah why. The hospital corridor seemed colder than the park residents had ever felt. Elena stood beneath the bright fluorescent lights with Noah beside her, his small hand locked around hers. A nurse had led them through 2 sets of doors before stopping outside the intensive care unit. "Is my dad in there?"
Noah asked.
The nurse nodded gently. "The doctors are taking care of him." Noah looked through the glass. He could see Adrian lying beneath white sheets, surrounded by quiet machines and medical equipment. His father's face looked strangely peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping after a long day. Elena felt Noah's fingers tighten around hers. "I want to see him." "Soon," the nurse said. "The doctors need a few more minutes." But those few minutes became an hour. Then another. Family members arrived. Lawyers whispered near the elevators. Adrian's advisors spoke in low voices, their expressions serious. Elena heard fragments of conversations, but understood enough to know that Adrian's condition was far worse than anyone had first admitted. Noah sat in a chair beside her, holding his blue dinosaur. He did not ask for food. He did not ask to go home. He only watched the ICU doors. Finally, a doctor approached. He was in his early 50s, with tired eyes and a calm manner that made Elena immediately nervous. "I am Dr. Michael Bennett," he said. "I am overseeing Mr. Park's care."
Elena stood.
"How is he?" Dr. Bennett paused. "His condition is extremely serious." Noah looked up. "When can I talk to him?" The doctor looked at the boy, then at Elena. "You can speak to him when we allow visitors." "He can hear me." Noah said it with complete certainty. Dr. Bennett offered a sympathetic smile. "We do not know what he can hear right now." Noah shook his head. "He can hear me." Elena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Let us wait for the doctor." A few minutes later, Dr. Bennett asked Elena to speak with him privately. Noah remained with the nurse just outside the room. "Mr. Park has suffered a catastrophic medical event," the doctor explained carefully. "We have performed several evaluations. We are deeply concerned about the absence of meaningful neurological responses." Elena listened without interrupting. Then came the words she had been dreading. "We have determined that Mr. Park meets the medical criteria for brain death." Elena stared at him. For several seconds, the hallway seemed completely silent. "Are you certain?" she asked. "We have followed the required procedures and repeated the examinations." Elena looked through the glass at Adrian. The man who had once filled every room with quiet authority now seemed impossibly far away. "What happens now?" she whispered. Dr. Bennett explained that the family would be given time to understand the situation and make difficult decisions. Elena nodded, but her mind was already on Noah. When she returned to him, she found him standing beside the ICU doors. "What did the doctor say?" he asked.
Elena knelt.
"Your dad is very sick." Noah studied her face. "Is he going to wake up?" Elena struggled to find the right words. Before she could answer, Noah walked toward the glass. "I need to tell him something." Elena followed. The nurse hesitated, then allowed them inside for a brief visit. Noah approached the bed slowly. He placed his blue dinosaur beside Adrian's hand and climbed carefully onto the chair next to him. Then he leaned forward and whispered, "Dad, you promised you would come back." Elena stood several feet away, trying to remain composed. Noah waited. Nothing happened. Then he placed his hand against Adrian's chest. "I know you are listening." The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Dr. Bennett watched from the doorway. Elena looked at the screen. And for just one brief moment, one of the numbers changed. The number on the monitor changed again, then returned to its previous rhythm. Dr. Michael Bennett stared at the screen for several seconds before stepping closer to Adrian's bed. Elena watched him carefully. Noah did not notice the doctor's concern. He was still holding his father's hand. "Dad," he whispered, "I brought your dinosaur." He placed the small blue toy beside Adrian's pillow. "You said he could stay with you." Elena felt her throat tighten. It was such a simple thing, but Noah spoke as though nothing had changed. As though Adrian might open his eyes at any moment and ask why everyone looked so worried. Dr. Bennett asked the nurse to review the monitor readings. The nurse nodded and quietly left the room. Elena looked at the doctor. Was that something? He did not answer immediately. It was unusual, he finally said. But one change does not tell us enough. Noah looked up. He moved. Elena turned toward him. What? Noah pointed to Adrian's hand. His finger moved. Elena looked down. The hand remained still. Maybe you thought you saw it, she said gently. Noah shook his head. I know what I saw. There was no fear in his voice now. Only certainty. Dr. Bennett studied the boy for a moment. What makes you so sure? Noah looked at his father. Because Dad does that when he hears me. Elena remembered the mornings at the park residence. Noah would talk about school, cartoons, or the latest drawing he had made, and Adrian would sometimes move one finger against the boy's hand without even looking up. It had become a private signal between them. Small. Almost invisible. But familiar. Dr. Bennett asked the nurse to bring up the previous recordings. They compared the latest readings with the earlier results. Nothing conclusive appeared, yet the doctor remained thoughtful. I want to review everything again, he said.
Elena nodded.
Noah leaned closer to Adrian. I told you I would stay. Outside the room, Adrian's relatives were beginning to discuss what would happen next. His legal team had already started organizing documents. Several people believed the difficult decisions should be made quickly. Elena heard one of them say that Adrian would not want his son exposed to unnecessary distress. She looked through the glass at Noah. He is not leaving, she said quietly. The room became still. No one argued. Later that evening, Elena returned to the ICU with a cup of warm tea for herself and a small blanket for Noah. The boy had fallen asleep beside his father, one hand resting against Adrian's arm. Elena covered him carefully. Then she noticed something on the bedside table. Adrian's phone had been placed there after his belongings were brought from the hospital entrance. The screen was dark, but a message notification appeared. Elena hesitated before looking at it. She did not want to invade Adrian's privacy. Then she noticed the sender's name. It was the same advisor Adrian had spoken with on the night before he left home. The message contained only one sentence. They're asking questions. Elena's heart sank. She looked toward Adrian, then toward Noah. Suddenly, the question was no longer only whether Adrian would wake up. Someone had been worried about what Adrian knew before he entered the hospital. And if that person was still watching, the Park family might be facing a danger no medical test could explain. The message on Adrian Park's phone would not leave Elena's mind. They're asking questions. 5 words, yet they carried a weight she could not explain. She looked at the sleeping Noah and then at Adrian, wondering what kind of questions could make a powerful man's advisor sound so uneasy. By morning, Dr. Michael Bennett had requested another review of Adrian's medical records. Elena waited outside the ICU while the medical team worked quietly inside. Noah sat beside her, holding his blue dinosaur and staring at the closed doors. Is Dad getting better? He asked. The doctors are looking carefully at everything, Elena said. It was the most honest answer she could give. When Dr. Bennett finally emerged, his expression was thoughtful. There is something I want to discuss, he
said.
Elena stood immediately. We found an inconsistency in the records from the first evaluation. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of inconsistency? A medication listed in the emergency report does not match the medication documented in the hospital intake record. Elena felt a chill move through her. Could that matter? It could, Dr. Bennett replied. We need to determine exactly what Mr. Park received before we make any further conclusions. Elena looked through the glass. Noah was still sitting beside his father. Does this mean your diagnosis has changed? She asked. Dr. Bennett chose his words carefully. It means we need more information. That was enough for Elena. She walked back into the room and found Noah leaning close to Adrian. Dad, the doctor is checking again. Noah smiled faintly. I knew he would. Elena sat beside him. How? Noah pointed toward Adrian's hand. Because Dad told me to listen. Elena remembered something Adrian had said months earlier. Noah had been frightened during a thunderstorm, and Adrian had placed the boy's hand against his chest. When you are scared, Adrian had told him, listen for something steady. Elena had never forgotten those words. Now Noah was doing exactly that. He rested his hand gently against Adrian's arm and waited. Hours passed. Dr. Bennett returned with another physician and asked for the room to remain quiet during a new series of evaluations. Elena stood near the window while Noah stayed close to his father. The hospital seemed to disappear around them.
No conversations. No phones. No footsteps.
Only the quiet rhythm of the monitors. Then Dr. Bennett looked up. His expression had changed. "There is a response," he said. Elena turned. "What kind of response?" "Small, but repeatable." Noah immediately looked at his father. "I told you." Dr. Bennett nodded, but he did not celebrate. "We still have a long way to go. We need to understand what is happening." Elena agreed. Yet another thought had begun forming in her mind. The medication discrepancy. The strange message. Adrian's unusual behavior before the hospital. None of those things belonged together by accident. She quietly asked Dr. Bennett whether anyone else had access to the medical records. He hesitated. "Several authorized people." "And can those records be changed?" Elena asked. The doctor looked at her carefully. "They should not be." Should not. Those two words stayed with her. That evening, Elena returned to Adrian's phone and reviewed the notification again. Another message had arrived. This time, the sender was not his advisor. It was an unknown number. The message contained only one sentence. "Stop looking into what happened." Elena stared at the screen. Then she looked at Noah, sleeping peacefully beside his father. Someone wanted her to stop asking questions. But Elena had spent years learning that silence could protect a person only for so long. And now, for the first time, she was certain of something. Adrian's condition was not the only mystery in that hospital room. The warning message remained on Elena's mind long after the hospital lights dimmed for the night. Someone wanted her to stop asking questions, but that only made the unanswered questions harder to ignore. The next morning, Dr. Michael Bennett asked Elena to meet him in a quiet consultation room. His expression was serious, but his voice remained calm. "We reviewed every medication and every evaluation again," he said. "There are still inconsistencies." Elena folded her hands. "Could someone have entered the wrong information?" "That is possible," Dr. Bennett said. "But the timing is unusual." He placed a folder on the table. Mr. Park arrived with one set of records. Several hours later, another version appeared in the hospital system. Elena looked at the pages without touching them. Who changed them? "We do not know yet." Across the hall, Noah sat beside Adrian, quietly drawing on a sheet of paper. He had drawn 3 people standing together beneath a bright yellow sun. His father was in the middle. Elena was on one side. Noah was on the other. When Elena returned to the room, he held up the picture. "Dad needs this when he wakes up." She smiled. "I think you will like it." Noah pointed to the drawing. He promised he would come back. Elena looked at Adrian. "Then we keep believing." Later, that afternoon, Dr. Bennett repeated the neurological evaluations. This time, the results were clearer. There were small but consistent responses that required further observation. The doctor explained that Adrian's condition remained extremely serious, but the previous conclusion could no longer be treated as the final word. Elena felt relief, but it was mixed with concern. Someone had already tried to convince everyone that Adrian was beyond recovery. If the records had been altered, there was a reason. And if there was a reason, someone might be afraid of what would happen if Adrian woke up. That evening, one of Adrian's advisors arrived at the hospital. His name was Marcus Reed, a man Elena had seen at the Park residence many times. He spoke politely, but his eyes kept moving toward the ICU doors. "How is Mr. Park?" he asked. "The doctors are still evaluating him," Elena replied. Marcus nodded. "I understand." Then he looked at Noah. "The boy should go home." Noah shook his head. "I am staying with Dad." Marcus forced a gentle smile. "Your father would want you to rest." Noah looked at Elena. "He would want me here." Elena noticed Marcus's expression change for the briefest moment. It was not anger. It was uncertainty. He turned toward the hallway. "I will speak with the family." After he left, Elena checked Adrian's phone again. The unknown number had sent another message. You were warned. She immediately showed it to Dr. Bennett. The doctor read it twice. You should report this to hospital security.
Elena nodded.
But before she could make the call, Noah suddenly stood beside Adrian's bed. Wait. Elena turned. Noah was staring at his father's hand. He is doing it again. Adrian's finger had moved.
Once.
Then again. Dr. Bennett rushed into the room and watched closely. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable. Adrian, the doctor said softly, if you can hear me, try again. The room fell silent. Noah placed his small hand over his father's. Dad, it is me. A few seconds passed. Then Adrian's finger moved beneath Noah's hand. Dr. Bennett looked at Elena. This time, neither of them needed to say anything. Someone had been trying to close the door on Adrian's story, but Adrian had just given them a reason to open it again. Adrian's finger moved beneath Noah's hand, and the room seemed to forget how to breathe. Dr. Michael Bennett leaned closer, watching for another response. Adrian, if you can hear me, do that again. Noah held perfectly still. Elena stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the bed. Several seconds passed. Then Adrian's finger moved once more. Dr. Bennett looked toward the nurse. Record that response. The nurse immediately documented the time. Noah's face brightened. He heard me. This time, nobody corrected him. Dr. Bennett began another careful evaluation, asking Adrian to respond to simple sounds and gentle instructions. The responses were faint, but they were consistent enough to demand further investigation. The diagnosis that had seemed final was no longer the whole story. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, but she kept her attention on Noah. The little boy had never stopped believing. He had simply refused to accept an ending that did not make sense to him. Then Dr. Bennett noticed something else. There is a pattern, he said quietly. The strongest responses happen when Noah speaks. Elena looked at Noah. Can you keep talking to your father? Noah nodded. He began telling Adrian about school, about the drawing he had made, and about the blue dinosaur sitting beside the pillow. His voice was soft and steady. You still owe me pancakes, he said. You promised Saturday morning. For several minutes, Adrian remained still. Then his breathing pattern changed slightly. Dr. Bennett watched the monitor. There.
Elena stepped closer.
What does that mean? It means his body is responding to something. The doctor did not make promises, but his tone had changed. There was caution now, mixed with something that sounded almost like hope. Outside the room, however, another conversation was taking place. Marcus Reed had spoken with members of Adrian's family and was insisting that the hospital should follow the original diagnosis. When Elena heard this, she immediately became suspicious. She asked Dr. Bennett whether Marcus had any authority over Adrian's medical decisions. Not directly, the doctor said. Then why is he pushing so hard? Dr. Bennett had no answer. Later that evening, hospital security informed Elena that someone had attempted to access Adrian's medical records using an authorized account. The attempt had been blocked, but the name attached to the account was enough to make Elena's heart sink. Marcus Reed. She returned to Adrian's room and found Noah sitting beside his father again. He is scared, Noah whispered. Elena looked at him. How do you know? Noah placed his hand against Adrian's arm. Because he always gets quiet when he is scared. Elena looked at Adrian's face. For the first time, she wondered whether he could truly hear them. She leaned closer. Adrian, if you can hear me, you are not alone. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then Noah spoke. Dad, I am still here. Adrian's hand shifted slightly.
Elena froze.
Dr. Bennett turned toward the bed. The movement came again, stronger this time. Then Adrian's eyelids trembled. Noah stood up so quickly that his chair moved backward.
Dad.
The room fell completely silent. Adrian's eyes opened only a fraction, but it was enough. Dr. Bennett immediately called for the medical team. Elena covered her mouth with one hand as Noah reached toward his father. Adrian could not speak yet. He could barely keep his eyes open, but his gaze found Noah. And when Noah whispered, I told you I would stay, Adrian's eyes moved toward him as if he understood every word. Adrian's eyes opened for only a few seconds, but those seconds changed everything. Noah stood beside the bed, holding his father's hand with both of his own. "Dad," he whispered. Adrian could not answer. His eyes slowly closed again as the medical team continued their careful evaluation. Dr. Michael Bennett remained calm, but there was no hiding the significance of what had just happened. He recognized him, the doctor said quietly. Elena looked at Noah. The boy was crying now, but his face carried something that had been missing for days.
Hope.
"I knew he would come back," Noah whispered. The doctors continued monitoring Adrian throughout the night. His condition remained serious, but his responses became more consistent. By morning, Dr. Bennett explained that Adrian had regained enough neurological activity to require a completely new assessment. The earlier conclusion was no longer valid. Elena felt relief, but she remembered the altered records, the unknown messages, and Marcus Reed's strange insistence that everyone accept the original diagnosis. She asked Dr. Bennett to review the hospital access records. This time, the hospital administration became involved. The account connected to the suspicious activity belonged to Marcus. When Marcus arrived later that morning, he expected to speak with the family. Instead, hospital security met him at the entrance and requested that he remain available for questioning. Elena watched from a distance as Marcus looked toward the ICU doors. For the first time, the confident advisor looked uncertain. Adrian was awake, and that meant the questions he had been trying to prevent could finally be answered. Several hours later, Adrian opened his eyes again. Noah was sitting beside him, reading from a children's book. He stopped in the middle of a sentence.
Dad.
Adrian looked toward him. His voice was weak when he finally spoke.
Noah.
The boy smiled through his tears. He leaned closer, but Elena gently reminded him to give his father space. Adrian's eyes moved toward Elena. Recognition appeared in his expression. "You stayed," he whispered.
Elena nodded.
Someone had to. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of those words. He had spent years believing that protection meant having enough money, enough influence, and enough people around him to control every possible outcome. Yet none of those things had brought him back to consciousness. What had remained beside him was a child who refused to leave and a woman who stayed because she believed that a person's dignity did not disappear simply because they could no longer speak for themselves. In the weeks that followed, Adrian slowly regained his strength. The investigation into the altered records continued, and the evidence surrounding Marcus eventually became clear enough for the proper authorities to take action. Adrian did not return to his old life in the same way. He began spending mornings with Noah. He ate breakfast at the kitchen table instead of behind a closed office door. He listened when Noah spoke. He thanked Elena every morning, not because she was an employee, but because he finally understood the value of someone who had stayed when staying was difficult. One Saturday morning, Noah placed his blue dinosaur on the table and looked at his father. "You promised pancakes." Adrian smiled. "I remember." Elena watched from across the kitchen as Adrian carefully prepared breakfast with Noah beside him. The house felt different now. Quieter, warmer, more human. Adrian had once believed that power meant making sure nobody could ever take anything from him. Now he understood something far more important. The strongest promise was not the one made by the most powerful person in the room. It was the promise kept by the person who refused to leave. And that morning, with sunlight filling the kitchen and his son sitting beside him, Adrian Park finally understood what he had nearly forgotten. Sometimes, the people who seem to have the least power are the ones who save what matters most.